Listeners, we know you love Cricket et al., the podcast, and what's not to love, but you can also love us online and read Cricket et al., the Substack experience. Isn't that right, Pete?
That's right. It's a podcast, a website.
It's a way of life. cricketetal.com for all your cricket reading needs. It's Gideon Haig over here.
It's Peter Lawler over here.
And welcome to Cricket et al., your independent cricket podcast. Although today's an et al. Podcast, Pete, isn't it? Because we've thrown the switch to vaudeville. In fact, you'll notice if you're looking very closely that my backdrop is different today. Yes, I'm sitting on the other side of the desk.
Yes, you haven't
Behind me are the non-fiction shelves.
There's not that sedimentary layer of wisdoms.
Exactly. And the reason is Pete's been kind enough to invite me on as a special guest to Cricket et al. To discuss my new book, Who is Wallace, which is part of the annals of et al. That I'm occasionally adding to. It's the story of the world's oldest prisoner, and Pete's read it and lost it.
The enigma.
Already.
I have lost. Well, Gideon, I don't know that that's absolutely correct. I think it was stolen, as I was saying before.
Fair enough.
It's a valuable product, and I had been a bit lax with my security. I may have left a window open somewhere. Someone climbed in. There are gangs in London armed with machetes out there roaming,
fighting for copies of Who is Wallace. Yeah.
Who is Wallace? The Enigma of the World's Oldest Prisoner. Now, is this your 56th book?
It's 52, I think.
Right.
Yeah, it's 52, But who's counting?
Well, mate, next time you're back, get me to be the scorer, because I counted. I got to 56. The Enigma of the World's Oldest Prisoner. I love the cover, but for a moment I thought that you'd found Menzies languishing in an insane asylum.
Looks like it, doesn't it?
He does look like Big Bob, doesn't he, a little bit?
Maybe all men who reached a certain age in that era did so. It looked a little bit like him. In fact, he was, just at the risk of getting ahead of the story, that was his nickname in the Ararat Asylum, Ming, because his eyebrows were so distinctive. He was so, and of course, like Menzies, he'd been there forever. There was a sense of, he had been there when everyone arrived, and he was going to be there when everyone finished.
We probably would have called him Johnny, wouldn't we? Because John Howard sort of stole the eyebrow stick, didn't he? Yeah. Before we get to the content of the book, I'm a little bit more interested in the form. Firstly, you publish it's published by the Archives Liberation Front. Now, I won't even dare to read the Latin version of that. Can you read that for me?
Look, the translation is "Files just want to be free," and the origin of the name is that back in 2021, I think it was, when we were both at the Oz, I was involved in organising a campaign to get emergency funding for National Archives, which was at the risk of its audiovisual collection disintegrating in the next few years, and they urgently needed the infusion of $67 million. This was, of course, under a coalition government. They were incorrigibly lax in their like successive governments before them at looking after Australia's important historical records. And we ran a campaign through the pages of the Oz to get this funding, which we did. And my friend Claire Wright, the historian, gave us the name of the Archives Liberation Front. And she even had a little tote made and a T-shirt. I think there are like 3 or 4 in existence, which I wear very proudly. And subsequently, I've done like 4 or 5 books now. They're little books. They're little sort of 5-finger exercises, as it were, which are about using public records to put together forgotten stories, marginal stories. They're not hugely important stories, but they're kind of fascinating, and I think otherwise they might fall between the cracks. So, and they often come from completely left field ideas. And this particular idea was had by my daughter Cecilia. We were talking in the kitchen one day, and we like to, set ourselves little challenges. And she asked me, Dad, who's the world's oldest prisoner? And I went, geez, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. So
some daughters ask their dads about the birds and the bees, or does God exist?
Yeah, we were just sitting there on our laptops. I think we were cruising through Ancestry at the time, or newspapers.com, which we're wont to do, and we went to the Guinness Book of Records, and there was this story. This man called Bill Wallace, who died at the age of almost 108. In the Ararat Mental Hospital, by then known as Arradale, in 1989. I thought that's astounding. And he'd been there since 1925, having been found unfit to stand trial on a murder charge. And I thought, he's a Victorian. I thought he's a Victorian. I thought, like Bill Lorry, I felt that patriotic pang for another world-beating Victorian. I've got to find out about it. But there's almost nothing around to read about him. But there is in public records.
By the ankle here. You're already down that rabbit hole. I'm just going to pull you back out for a minute. Hey, okay, all right, yeah.
Yep.
So you've published 5 books in under that Archive Liberation Front. Yeah. So there was The Night Was Bright Moonlight, and I Could See a Man Quite Plain, which was notionally a book about a cricket murder. Son of a test cricketer murders somebody with a cricket bat. That'll do us, won't it?
Yep, that'll do us.
The Girl in Cabin 350, which was a Melbourne crime mystery. Of sorts.
Well, disappearance, actually. A disappearance. That's what interested me about it, was that, the gap that a person leaves when they simply disappear and there's no evidence of what happened to them.
Which would frustrate somebody like you, because you like to find their traces. The One Indiscretion of His Life, which was about William Carkeek.
Carkeek, yep.
Yes. Yep. And A Scandal in Bohemia, The Life of Molly Dean. Which was
that was actually published by Penguin. But,
that's not on Archive. No, sorry. All right.
That's actually a mainstream publication for what it's worth.
My researcher. Sorry.
I could easily bring it back, because it's a really, really fascinating story.
Bloody good book, that one. Love that book. Set around Montserrat and that whole community. They're all loosely crime novels, but you say it's a difference. They are they are books that you've pulled out of the archives. Why do you publish them yourself? Is it because you don't want to go through the process of dealing with a publisher, or?
I think, I like to go off on my own follies. I like to indulge my own curiosity. And, the process of dealing with a publisher is quite laborious. You're kind of having to whip them into the enthusiasm that you feel for a story. And, sometimes you feel like it, sometimes you don't. And in this case, I didn't really. And the other thing about doing something like this is that you get to publish it to your own standards. This is a beautiful book.
It sure is.
It's immaculately designed. They are. Yeah. We use very high quality stock. We use lots of illustrations. It's amazingly, it's done super cheap. The people who make the most out of this book are the printers and Australia Post.
I was going to ask you about the economics of publishing a book from home.
Yeah, unfortunately.
How do they shape up? Is it a better deal than going to, say, one of the major publishers? What do we get about standard deal? About 12%, is it, of the sale
the
price?
economics have changed actually a bit over the last couple of years. I can tell you confidentially, because the price of paper and the cost of printing's gone up considerably. It's probably doubled in the last 2 years. So it's incredible. A pretty marginal endeavour. Wow. Yeah. I mean, you'd really want to do it. And I did want to do it. Once having set myself the task, I wasn't going to stop halfway. My daughter, of course, soon lost interest in it. I'd tell her this fascinating fact about it, and she'd go, "Oh, you're still working on that, are you?" And she looked a bit bemused when I gave it to her the other day. "Here it is, darling." And she said, "Oh, good. I'd completely forgotten about that." But anyway,
I identify a dynamic here. I identify a dynamic. I think we go through our early life sort of searching for approval from a parent and parents. And then I think we pivot and we seek approval from our children. No?
Sorry, you went quiet there for a second.
Oh, you didn't hear me. I made a very profound observation.
Make it again, Pete.
Okay. I said, I think we go through our early life seeking the approval of our parents or our guardians. I then think we pivot and even more abjectly crave the attention and approval of our children.
Oh my
I think
God,
I found myself in that place lately. Yeah.
That is so painful because it is so true.
I'm sorry, Gideon. I didn't want to go there, but it's been on my mind this week, and I noticed that comment. You do love research, don't you? It's your happy place. I mean, you've got many flexes as a writer, and as a thinker, and as an observer of things. But I think your ability to research is second to none. Is that just because it's a passion you've always had? Your mother's a librarian, so it's in the genes. It's in your...
She is. It is in the genes. I am fascinated by public records. I do like handling the real thing, the actual document. That
with
absolutely...
the white gloves on?
It really excites me. And I guess the other thing is that, these days a lot of information is ready at the press of a button or a keystroke. It's so easy. Research feels too easy. So you have to kind of set yourself tasks that require a little bit more of you. And in this case, it required a lot because a lot of the records were sealed off because they are records personal to Bill Wallace, and there are privacy considerations. So one of the first things I did was, with the help of my genealogist friend Graham Haig, go looking for Bill Wallace's descendants. To see if we could find some sort of living relative, because having gone to Ararat and asked around, no one had ever been able to find out, the family traces of Bill Wallace. Anyway, we were, after sending out a lot of letters and going down a lot of dry gullies, able to find a great grandnephew living in northern New South Wales.
How long were you on Wallace's trail? Can I ask?
Oh, we were probably on it for about 3 or 4 months, and I posted letters hither and yon, and didn't get a lot of replies.
When did you start this project? Sorry,
this was about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So Richard Tawney, nice fellow, he replied, and he said, we always we vaguely knew about this story in the family, and we are pretty interested. So I thought, okay, well, with his cooperation, he painstakingly compiled a statutory declaration saying that he was the great-grandnephew, having to substantiate it all the way with documentation.
Oh, really?
So, death certificates and marriage certificates. Gosh. And, these things are not easy to find. It took a lot of effort. And then we filed Freedom of Information requests with the Departments of Health in New South Wales and Victoria, because by this stage, I'd become aware that before his incarceration in the Ararat Asylum and J Ward, the ward for the criminally insane, Bill Wallace had also been confined to the Kenmore and Gladesville mental hospitals. So there were records in New South Wales as well. So we did FOI requests in both states. Yeah. And
I drove you out to the archives.
You did. Actually, you did, didn't you?
One morning. Yeah. Yep. Very early, Gideon.
Yeah, it was very kind of you. Kingswood, Kingswood country. And the records in Victoria are absolutely voluminous. I mean, if a guy, spends 64 years in the care of the state, that generates a lot of records. In fact, there were so many records that I had to apply for them in tranches.
Oh, really?
So 200 pages at a time. I think I ended up with something like 800 pages of records in Victoria alone.
Because he was a very keen letter writer, wasn't he? Yeah. Was it a lot of his letters?
Well, they actually weren't part of my FOI requests. They were a completely accidental discovery. So I went into the Public Record Office in North Melbourne, and there are about 25 boxes of miscellaneous administrative records for the Ararat Mental Hospital, uncatalogued. It just says, it doesn't tell you what's in them,
Oh,
I
great.
just thought, okay, I'm just going to have to go through all these boxes.
Get out.
So I did. And you know what? In the very last box, without any information attached to it, no explanation, no provenance, there are these letters which Bill Wallace wrote from
the last box.
From the last box. All these letters that he wrote to the Inspector General of the Insane, which was an actual office in Victoria in the 1930s,
yes.
written in a tiny but very precise hand in pencil, complaining about aspects of his incarceration, such things as the fly in his soup, the placement of the teapot on the table, the general attitude of the attendants, their sort of gruffness or roughness. All studiously, at the bottom he would write, please accept my apologies for these being written in pencil. Yours respectfully, W.R. Wallace.
And he was an elegant correspondent, wasn't he?
He was an elegant correspondent.
It's a beautiful handwriting. You sometimes see the handwriting of the insane, and their insanity is in their handwriting. That's right. Clearly, that's not him. He's reasonably eloquent, but he's obsessive.
He's very obsessive. Yes.
So, I mean, the first... he became something of a course celebre in 1987 when a colleague of ours, Stuart Rintoul, set out to do a series of articles for The Australian on these insane asylums. And I'll just read out, because he's lovely. He's a great journo, Stu.
Yeah, terrific journo.
I love these quotes from the article. And this is about Bill. The 20th century has passed him by. During the 61 years of his incarceration, there have been 16 Australian prime ministers, 11 American presidents. He missed the Great Depression, World War II, Korea and Vietnam, Mao's Revolution, the shooting of JFK, Men on the Moon, miniskirts and rock and roll. Mr. Wallace spends his days and nights in a small locked ward in a section of the hospital for the psychogeriatric patients. 6 decades inside an asylum, no contact with the outside world at all, really.
Yes.
As you say, at one point, never, and he had longer to go than this, hadn't seen the horizon as far as we know.
Exactly. Yeah. It is. Look, we should probably explain why he was there. I'll tell you a little bit about Bill Wallace's
That was
background.
The next question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. Okay. So, I mean, otherwise, in lots of ways, he had a very unremarkable life up to that point. He was born in country New South Wales near Young in 1881. Cudgel Creek. Yep. Nathan Lyon country. Farming family. Interestingly, the most interesting thing about him before his incarceration was that he served in the Boer War. And in fact, he was the last Australian survivor of the Boer War.
Yes, I found one other thing that really caught my attention about his early life is that he, in his records, it states, this is 40 years into his incarceration, he does not know the name of his mother.
Yes,
because his father never addressed his mother by name.
Yes, yeah.
It's a really curious thing.
Lovely,
but of course, Gideon Haigh knows his mother's name.
Yeah,
he should have just asked you. Walterina. That's even more curious. But anyway,
which they did eventually find out, because they did in the 1980s make contact with a genealogist who was able to furnish some biographical details.
Yeah.
But anyway, he becomes
he went to the Boer War.
He went to the Boer War.
1903 or returned in 03, yes.
Yeah, in 2024, I was in England, I went to National Archives in Kew to go through the records of his unit, which was the 3rd New South Wales Mounted Rifles were seconded to the Inniskilling Dragoons.
That's right,
And so I went out to Kew to look in the archives to see if there was any trace of him or the unit. There was some records of the unit, but nothing of him individually. So it was a bit of a wild goose chase. But you have to go down every rabbit hole, otherwise you'll lie awake at nights wondering what you might have found. But
what you might have missed. Gee, that's interesting.
Exactly.
You're driven like that. It's almost a bit OCD in a way.
It is a little bit OCD. But then I got lucky because I contacted. This is in the area of Temora, which is where he spent the first stages of his farming career. I went to the Temora Bundawarra Community Centre, and I was befriended by a man called Bill Spears, who told me amazingly that not only did he have quite a lot of information about the family, the early history of the family in that area, but they had Bill Wallace's Boer War medals in the community centre. So they're in the book. I don't know how on earth they got there, but they're there.
Did he have a Kruger or something on his fob chain?
He did. Correct. He did.
Yeah,
he had a Kruger crown, which was attached to his watch chain.
What makes a young man from country New South Wales, farming stock, sign up and go to the Boer War? I mean, I've always understood why people would go to World War I or World War II. It's a bit more explicable. I'm not sure that I'd be up for it, but Boer War, South Africa. Do we have any skin in this game, or is it just the game itself?
I think it's the game, isn't it? And he was actually too young. He was nominally too young to enlist, so he obviously lied about his age. But
was he a good soldier?
Yeah. Well, we don't really know, but we know that he got paid because he's
behaved. Yeah.
Would you believe his pay records still exist?
Yes.
Yeah. So we know that his pay was sent to his father. We've got his discharge certificates. We know that he didn't get into any disciplinary trouble. So he must have been a pretty reasonable trooper. And of course, we have this fantastic photo of him. This superb photo.
It's a ripper, isn't it? Yeah.
In his with his Sam Brown belt and his khaki and his slouch hat. He looks like the hope of a family.
So he comes back in 2003. He returns to farming. And nothing eventful seems to happen in his life. He doesn't marry. He doesn't have too much interaction.
No. He gets burned out. He gets burned out as a share farmer in that area, and he moves to Dorrigo.
Yes, that's right.
In northern New South Wales. And once again, I had a huge stroke of luck in Dorrigo. I rang the community museum up there, and I got put onto a man whose expertise is researching land title records. Absolutely ripping bloke. Trevor Edmonds. Thank you very much, Trevor Edmonds, for all your help. So with Trevor's help, I was able to find the titles for all the land that Bill Wallace accumulated. Now, even though he did not marry, he was actually he was very good with money, and he accumulated quite a sizable set of vacant lots, which were later developed. All of them were preserved in this, the beautiful handwriting of old-fashioned land titles. If you've ever seen them, they're just absolutely
they're gorgeous. Swirly capitals and things like that. His life doesn't become eventful until he goes to the Easter show in 1918.
In 1918, where he has kind of a sort of an inexplicable mental breakdown. He begins to suffer paranoid delusions. He begins to think that he's being followed. He begins to suspect that there is a hypnotist has been followed him on the boat down from Dorrigo, from Coffs Harbour to Sydney. And his delusions become so florid and his behaviour becomes so aberrant that he goes into a police station to complain, and they basically lock him up. They think this guy's crazy. And he appears before a magistrate, and the magistrate says, yep, crazy. They get a couple of doctors in to swear it. In those days, that was all you need, a couple of medical opinions. And he's sent off, first of all, to the Kenmore Mental Hospital. And he then goes to Gladesville. He spends probably 2 years in state care. While he's there, he writes letters. And amazingly, those letters still exist. They're in the records of the Kenmore. They are. Well, actually, he writes to a friend. We don't know whether the letter obviously didn't get out of the mental hospital because it was preserved, and he goes into the nature of his delusions. He says that he is being persecuted by what he calls the influence, and the influence is everywhere, and it exercises its powers by hypnosis. He doesn't know who exactly is behind it, but of course he suspects everyone, and that includes the medical staff and the attendants. And he's in the grip of these delusions probably for a couple of years. But then, as often happens with these conditions, the conditions begin to decline. He becomes less hostile, and he's discharged. But by this stage, unfortunately, what happened in those days?
Is that about 1920? He's discharged?
This is 1920. Yeah. But what happened in those days when you were sectioned was that your property came under the control of what was called the Master in Lunacy.
Yeah.
And the Master in Lunacy was empowered by statute to liquidate same, because of course you couldn't have property in the hands of a madman. So everything that Bill Wallace had built over the preceding decades was sold. He was given the money, but his farm equipment, his stock, his horses, all of these were liquidated. So when Bill Wallace emerges from Gladesville in 1920, he's quite a comparatively wealthy man, but he's completely rootless. He has nothing to return to. And in fact, for the next 4 years, he basically vanishes.
The missing years, yes.
The wilderness years of Bill Wallace. And the only traces that we have, which I was able to find with the help of Trevor Edmonds, was that he was acting as a mortgagor for property.
That's right.
In those days, bank finance was quite difficult to get, so he would lend money to people to buy houses or to buy property. He seems to have been in the Sydney area. He seems to have not come to the attention of authorities, but we do know that in around about the middle of 1924, he begins to carry a gun because he's worried. He knows that he's a wealthy man. He fears that people are on his trail. He feels the need to defend himself. And in fact, he leaves Sydney and comes to Melbourne, in the middle of 1925.
And there's a big event on Wednesday, December 9, 1925 at the Windsor Cafe on King Street between Little Bourke and Lonsdale. And we're going to find out what happened after this break.
We're back on Cricket et al. Pete, there's been some interesting developments before we get back to the story of Bill Wallace. In the world of Cricket et al.,
there has been, Gideon,
some great opportunities coming your way if you're a patron. Tell us about them, Pete. Tell us about the live event that we're doing in Sydney.
I can tell you about January. The live event in January on the eve of the Test match, which would make it, Gideon, January the 3rd
of January,
which I think it's a Saturday night at 3 p.m. Is it?
It is, yeah. 3 till 7. God, 4 hours of us.
What? Oh no, I know. There'll be drinking. And maybe there'll be a barbecue as well.
There might be a bit of dead air as well.
Sure. It's going to be spectacular. It's going to be a great night. Yeah. It's going to be a Cricket et al. Live podcast at a brewery, at the sister brewery to Willie the Boatman, Akasha Brewery in Five Dock. We're starting. Why are we starting early, Gideon? It's
because we don't want to clash with TGC. TGC are doing their live show at the State Theatre, so we're like the cartoons on before the main feature.
Yeah, but having suffered the ignominy of having people stand up and say, sorry, we've got to go to the TGC event.
We've learned our lesson. Yeah,
we've learned our lesson. Place. Yeah, we're like the WBBL we've moved to earlier in the summer. Anyway, if you go online, I don't know where you find it, probably on, where do you find the tickets?
Oh, Sticky Tickets.
Sticky tickets, and you've sent out an email to subscribers of
this morning.
Et al. People can go to the Cricket et al. Website and find that. And also, Gideon, there's a new T-shirt.
There is a new T-shirt.
Hang on. I just heard a disembodied voice tell me that there will be a link in the show notes.
Good move. Thanks, Dave. Yep. There'll be a link in the show notes for those who are interested and the dwindling band. And there's a new T-shirt. There is a new T-shirt. And this is very close to my heart. I haven't actually got it yet, but I've already ordered 5. It's the Craig Sargent T-shirt. Some people who follow cricket will know that I am singularly obsessed with Craig Sargent, who played 12 Test matches for Australia in 1977-8, made 522 runs at 23.72 with the highest score of 124. I won't do his scores again. I've done those before. But it looks magnificent, designed by our friend Dan Toomey from Fisher Classics, a pastiche of an old cricket collector's card. What a specimen of manhood. If you don't have this on your Christmas shopping list, you really, really should. I can't wait to get to Perth and wear it. Everyone's going to be saying, where do I get that T-shirt? And the easy answer is on the merch page of Cricket et al, which if you go to our Substack, you'll find. Looking up in the header field, just click on that. There's a range of merchandise available, and the Craig Sargent tee is our new featured article. But we should get
almost as happy as when you find that Wallace file in the archive.
Exactly.
You are.
Okay.
So we're back. Okay. It's Wednesday, the 9th of December, 1925. We found our man again. He's having lunch in a cafe, the Windsor Cafe, between Little Burke and Lonsdale. I think you even know what was on the bill there, don't you?
Well, the interesting thing is that he was staying in a boarding house.
Yeah.
But the landlady had found him very, very secretive. Like he wouldn't really talk. Like he read the newspaper, but he wouldn't talk about current events. He wasn't pleasant. You know, he was just a little bit aloof, a little bit standoffish. So, but he had been going to this cafe for lunch. It was a classic kind of workman's cafe in King Street. Alas, the cafe is gone. That area of King Street's just been demolished in the last year. But I have retraced his steps because the streetscape is otherwise unchanged. And he was having his lunch when two other characters walked in. One of them was a fellow called Ernest Williams, who was a young man from the Bendigo area. And another one was a guy called Gene McRobertson. Gene McRobertson was an American, spoke with a very broad American accent, which in Australia in 1925 was not familiar. It really did stand out. You know, this is when I thought about this is the era before talkies. This is the era before mass media. An American accent has a way of cutting through a crowd. So when Gene McRobertson lights a cigarette in the cafe and exhales with satisfaction and conducts his monologue at the top of his voice, this other character, W.R. Wallace, is minded to object because apparently you're not allowed to smoke in this cafe. This is an unusually woke cafe for 1925. You're not allowed to have a cigarette at the end of your meal, and there is a clash of personalities, a clashing exchange in which Bill Wallace makes disparaging remarks about Americans. You and your kind, your kind of
dirty Yankee bastards.
Dirty Yankee bastards. Well, this is what Gene McRobertson says that Wallace said to him. We don't know Wallace's own version of events because he never gave it. Anyway,
it's interesting, isn't it? Though this it sort of expresses an antipathy towards Americans.
Yes.
And I don't know where this has sprung from. I understand in the Second World War, after a bit of exposure to American soldiers or something like that. But this is very curious, this hostility towards Americans. Yeah. And Williams also spoke with us, is that correct? With an American accent they'd both, for some reason.
Williams had been in America, which is where he had met McRobertson, and they had come back to Australia, and they were they purported to be working as electricians, but they're interesting. We never found out very much about them, except that there was a file. It's a great file. So Gene McRobertson, just at the risk of getting slightly ahead of our story, while I was browsing in National Archives, hold on to your ankles, kids. While I was browsing in National Archives, I said, "There's a file on Gene McRobertson, and it's an immigration file, but it was a closed file." So I had to apply to National Archives to get access to it. It took me 6 months to get the file back, but it turns out Jean McRobertson was not his real name. It was an alias, and he was an unusual character, let's just say, who got himself into some interesting scrapes later on. But this is, I'm at the risk of galloping off down into a self-indulgent area, but that's all part of the book.
Well, nobody's dead yet.
Nobody's dead yet.
Yeah. Spoiler! I just spoiled it. Go on.
Okay, so this exchange happens, and it's McRobertson extinguishes his cigarette and goes outside with Williams, and momentarily the dispute seems to have been diffused. But McRobertson and McWilliams aren't happy. You can tell they're kind of spoiling for a fight, and in fact, they go outside and they run into some friends of theirs, and they complain bitterly about this guy who's behaved so antagonistically towards them inside, and they hang around for the next 10 minutes. Until Bill Wallace finishes his meal and comes outside, and there is an altercation, or an altercation begins. First of all, it's verbal, and then it becomes physical. And in fact, it's a fight. It's a fight. It's a brawl.
It's not a one-on-one fight, though, is it?
And it's not a one-on-one fight. Others join in the fun, and of course,
the group has ganged up on Bill Wallace.
The group have ganged up, and they're meaning to mete out some justice to this guy who has behaved so rudely. But what they don't know is that Bill Wallace is packing heat. He's got his gun. He's got his little Colt revolver. It's in a homemade holster inside his jacket, and as this sort of rolling maul moves down the street, Bill Wallace pulls out his gun and shoots Ernest Williams. Shoots Ernest Williams dead. And of course, gun crime is not uncommon in Melbourne in the 1920s, but this seems to have come in the middle of an ordinary working day, and there is shock and astonishment. He does it. The shot is fired out the front of a butcher shop, and a man called Hamilton, who owns the butcher shop, comes to the door, and he hasn't seen the fight, but he has seen the shot fired. And he remonstrates with Wallace and says, "You've shot him, you mongrel." And Wallace replies, "I had to do it. I had to do it."
He warned him, didn't he, Gideon?
He did.
He say to him, "I'll put a hole in you."
He did. He said, "I'll put a hole in you." And they didn't take it seriously. They thought they had strength in numbers. But this is something that Wallace says periodically over the next few hours, because he is arrested by a police constable called Edward Cobbledick, and he is examined by a detective who has come down from Russell Street. He basically says, "I had to do it."
Yeah.
And in fact, over the next month to 6 weeks, while he's on remand awaiting trial, it seems as though Bill becomes convinced that Williams and McRobertson were part of a larger conspiracy against him, that they were acting perhaps at the behest of the influence that he's referred to before, but there was some agenda inscrutable to Bill that he couldn't penetrate, but somehow knew he was there, was underlying the altercation. And in the course of this, he's examined by 2 doctors, as often happened at the time, and they basically say, "This man is insane. This man is in the grip of paranoid delusions. This man is unfit to stand trial." Their recommendation goes forth to the Office of Public Prosecution. Noli prosequi is filed in court.
Yes.
And what happens to Bill Wallace is that he is to be detained indefinitely at what was called the governor's pleasure. He was to be put not into a prison, but into a ward for the criminally insane called J Ward, which was the old Ararat jail, which was at the other end of the town of Ararat in country Victoria, to the old Ararat Asylum, now the Ararat Hospital for the Insane. And they're basically putting him there because they don't know what to do with him. And what do you do with a man like that at that stage?
Do you think the act of shooting the guy was not necessarily the act of an insane person, was it? It could be argued that this is an act, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean people aren't out to get you. And these people were definitely out to get him. He was under physical threat. I'm not making a case for him to be an innocent man as such here, but that's a reasonably rational, if angry, and excessive act. He almost applies this psychological layer to it in retrospect.
Absolutely.
The insanity is applied to it.
He does. Yeah. I mean, had he stood trial, I suspect it would have been knocked down to manslaughter, and he probably would have been out in 10 years.
Yeah,
but he doesn't stand trial because he refuses. He refuses to give evidence, and B, the Crown just says, we can't deal with this guy. He's beyond the capacity of the criminal justice system to treat. We're just going to put him somewhere where he can't come to too much harm, and he can't cause too much harm, because obviously he's a guy who's maybe a little bit unpredictable in a scenario like this.
You've got the notes from his admission here, which is Campbell, of course, is the superintendent, isn't he? There, it says he is insane.
Yeah.
He is furtive and suspicious, evasive in conversation on matters pertaining to his previous history, because he would never speak about the crime again, would he?
Exactly.
During his time in incarceration. Delusions of persecution. That's the reason he carried the revolver without a license. He's mentally exalted, which is a curious phrase, isn't it?
Yes.
And thinks he owns much property, etc., which is apparently not a fact, but he had.
He had owned property. That's an interesting point, Pete. Yes, he had owned property which had been sold, and which had probably had the effect of destabilising him even further. So, in fact, the system in some ways had precipitated his problem, had aggravated his symptoms by leaving him without any sort of stable platform on which to operate, so any stable ground to build on.
Yeah. So he goes into this ward. It's into J Ward in Arrowdale. Now, tell us about institutions at that point. It was it had been running for about 40 years there in the town of Ararat.
Yeah. Well, like every state in Australia, Victoria had a very elaborate asylum system. They were now called hospitals for the insane, which became great dumping grounds for absolutely anyone that society couldn't deal with.
Yes. And they were all lumped in as one.
All lumped in together.
At the Ararat Asylum. Yeah.
People suffering sort of mental impairments, the depressed, the women with postpartum depression,
women with the wrong political views.
Indeed.
Yes.
It's a great miscellany of people. And of course it's in country Victoria, so it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. There were asylums all over Victoria, Beechworth, Ballarat, Kew, Sunbury, Mont Park, Royal Park, all dealing with different aspects of, or different categories of patient, but huge, absolutely huge, and lawless in a way. This was not a system that was designed really to treat anyone. If you got better, it was probably almost accidental. It was really custodial in nature, carceral in nature. In the case of the ward for the criminally insane, J Ward still stands to this day. It's well worth a visit, because when it was closed in the early 90s, it was
J Ward's the prison wing that they developed.
Is the prison wing.
After a while, they decided that the prisoners needed their own wing, didn't they?
They did.
J Ward.
So the Arrowdale, the mental hospital, is on one side of the town in Ararat. It's absolutely huge, and falling to bits because it's just too big to do anything with now. And progressively, it's disintegrating. I dare say within 15 to 20 years, it'll be bulldozed. You can still go into parts of it, but increasingly the areas are off limits, including M18, which was the last ward in which Bill was accommodated. But J Ward on the other side of town, it's a jail. It's an old colonial jail, bleak, cold, bluestone, barbed wire, turrets, absolutely everything. It looks like a scaled-down version of Pentridge. And you can just imagine what it was like. I mean,
it doesn't have the lovely grounds of the traditional Victorian asylum, does it?
It doesn't. No, it doesn't have anything like them.
Considerably.
Yeah. Yeah.
He has some interesting, well, they're not roommates, are they? They're sort of interesting people that he's in that prison with. And if I'd have been with you down these rabbit holes, I'd have been off on another one, I reckon. One of the people in J Ward when he's admitted is 16-year-old David Clarence Freeman, known as Dummy. Because he suffered I don't know why you're laughing. Get in this. No. Childhood measles, which had robbed him of the ability to speak. But at the age of 16, he decapitated a playmate in a playground.
He did. And spent the rest of his life in J Ward.
Tell me you didn't just do a little side search on that. No.
Well, I tell you what, he is actually quite interesting because in the 1950s, he begins to create artworks. This is actually not in the book. But he becomes like an embroider. This was, by this stage, there were primitive efforts being made to create a kind of a therapeutic regime. And one of the ways in which they were encouraged to express themselves was by art, by craft. And he does create some really quite beautiful items, which are still in the museum at J Ward. I should recommend the museum at J Ward. Yeah. It's well worth a visit if you're in Ararat. The other fascinating man there is Sidney Jeffries.
Oh, I was just going to get to Jeffries, Jeffrys. Jeffries.
I mean, this is a fascinating story. Great, I could write a book about this. He was the radio officer on one of Mawson's expeditions to the Antarctic, who becomes completely obsessed, who becomes deluded, and sort of goes native, just disappears, wanders off into the bush, believes that he's receiving sort of astral communications, is locked up as a vagrant. And once again, no provision, no capacity to treat someone like that. They just put him in J Ward. And it's a tragic conclusion for a man who I think he's still the man who sent the first radio message from the Antarctic to Australia, which is an astonishing historical feat. So look, I mean, there's lots of other really, really fascinating stories in J Ward, all of whom are deserving of a book. Probably none of whom registered with Bill Wallace, because he is completely secure in his world of delusion. He is almost unreachable, except occasionally when he sends forth these letters, these incredible, minute, concentrated, completely self-involved letters to the Inspector General of the Insane, who somehow he thinks that he might be able to establish a simpatico with, because strangely, even though this iniquitous regime has put him away, he maintains a strange faith in his capacity to communicate man to man with the Inspector General of the Insane. So the letters are extremely courteous. They're very polite. They're very detailed. They're written in a very, very formal tone. So these are very.
Are they the letters of an insane man, Gideon? Because the ones that I've read, unless I've missed some, they're almost like the sort of, that problem tenant on the the residence board who's always writing, complaining about someone's put their pot plant in the wrong area or something like that. It's the footprint on the it's the fly's footprint on the pulpit that upsets him.
Astounding,
but it's not, but. It's just kind of he sounds like a bit of a crank, really. He doesn't sound like anyone who's lost their reason. And even in like you say, he withdraws into his insanity. There's a degree of assumption there, isn't he? Because he's just withdrawn. He just doesn't seem to need to engage with other people.
He doesn't.
He's quite content looking out the window.
He is, and there's no attempt made to communicate with him at all.
No. Very little.
There's sort of a mutual disdain between Wallace and his jailers. They're happy enough to let him bump along. If you like,
well dressed, isn't he?
There's a particular cupboard that he likes sitting in. He likes to sit in the same place every day. He doesn't involve himself in work which is one of the things that inmates were encouraged to do. There was always this idea that you could work your passage out by showing yourself to be productive. Bill's got no interest in doing that, and
he's got a lot of money in the bank.
He does. Anyway, Bill languishes there,
decade after decade. Is he getting any treatment?
He's getting no treatment at all. No, because there really is no treatment available. There's no interest in psychotherapy. There's no pharmaceutical solution involved. There is still this ongoing belief that this is what you do with people who don't fit. And Bill certainly avowedly does not fit. Occasionally, the records prove that, someone comes to see him and says, how are you doing? And he's very hostile. He's still quite adamant about this belief that someone has been conspiring against him. After a while, it stops being the influence. It becomes the Jews. The Jews always popular as potential conspirators. And some of the things that he's recorded as saying are quite, they're quite antagonistic. They're quite volatile, and they do suggest someone who is potentially still dangerous, but he's getting very old by this stage.
They're not by the views that aren't out of step with the times. I mean,
not at all.
No, they wouldn't. Not extraordinary at all.
No. And of course, by the early 1960s, he was born in 1881. In 1962, he's 81. What do you do with a man like this?
How long has he been in jail that long? 30 odd years.
Since 1925. So. But at that stage, he's old enough for it to be...
Could there be an argument, Gideon, that is perhaps the perfect treatment for a man like Wallace? He's not complaining about being incarcerated. Later, he's offered the opportunity to change the conditions and perhaps even and have more freedom and things like that. But he is perfectly content. He's not railing against it, and he's not actively insane in there. He seems to have almost found a place. I mean, it's a very blunt tool to use for the insane, just to put them in an institution, and more so the criminally insane because of the harshness of those institutions. But some people do seem quite content in those settings.
Well, in some ways,
he was.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, what's shocking about this story is not that it was aberrant, it's that it was inevitable. After a certain point, it becomes almost impossible for Bill Wallace to return to anything. Yeah. Not that there's anything really for him to return to, because his family lose contact with him at all. I was only able to find one letter that was ever written by the family to Ararat.
From his father, was it?
No, it was from his sister.
Oh, was that earlier?
His sister. This is 1929. His sister writes, how's he doing? The superintendent replies, no change. And that's the last that his family hears of him. When later on he's asked to fill out a form about his family, he gives contact details for his sister that are well and truly out of date. The sister's dead. The sister's been dead for decades. He knows that he's got a family outside, but he has no interest in contact with them, and he's absolutely unaware of what's happened to him. In 1962, because of his age, the superintendent recommends that he be moved to the main hospital building, which by this stage is called Arradale. And he's very, very reluctant to go because at this stage, he hasn't seen the outside world. As I said, he hasn't seen the horizon since 1925, and he suspects that death and menace lurk there. Yeah. So he's very, very reluctant to be sent there. But then something mysterious happens. When he gets there, he kind of takes it all in, and he becomes much more compliant, much more peaceful. The hostile, bristling rhetoric of his earlier years is abandoned, and he does weirdly socialize to a certain extent. In particular, he begins to play chess. He becomes an obsessive chess player and a very, very good chess player who beats absolutely everyone in the hospital. Yeah.
And he has to win, I assume.
And he has to win. He becomes very truculent if he doesn't actually win.
It's something we've wrestled with for a long time, but in the 60s, they're really what society really was wrestling with this concept of the insane and how to treat them. I mean, by then we'd already been through the lobotomy, those terrible sort of intrusions, lobotomy, electric ECT, still used today. And, not necessarily. Yeah. But it even starts to enter popular culture, doesn't it? To a degree. Yeah. I mean, everybody knows the film from the Ken Kesey book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That book was 62, wasn't it? And Enoch Powell, of all people,
it's fascinating,
becomes some sort of champion of the institutionalized.
So Bill becomes this kind of still point in the moving world because attitudes to asylums are changing. People are beginning to think, you know what, maybe people aren't all completely insane. Maybe there are degrees of insanity. Maybe it would be better if for some people in state care, if they were close to their families, who is to say who's insane and not? And out of this confusion of impulses, and also the attitude of the state, which is these facilities are very, very expensive to maintain. Maybe we could do something to change the regime. It's too late for Bill. It's too late. He's institutionalized, but over the course of the next 30 years, as the system begins to break down, it begins to be dissolved and community care becomes possible and a pharmacological regime is introduced, Bill becomes this a testimony to the efficacy of the system because he's lived for so long. Everyone goes, well, he's over 100. Maybe the system's not so bad after all. And then other people go, this is crazy. This guy's wasted his life. He's been locked up for so long. How can you say that the system works if a man has basically had his entire life swallowed up in the by an impervious state? And as you said earlier, Bill becomes an object of fascination. So he has his 100th birthday in 1981, and stories begin to be published about him. He even starts to receive fan mail, and all this fan mail has been collected by the Department of Health. People write to him from all over Australia, and they all have this idea that he might be lonely, that he might need to find God, that he might like a pen pal.
He might be their father.
That he might be their father or some lost relative.
Yeah, which actually happened,
He becomes this sort of tabula rasa on which people project their wishes or their notions. He never, of course, answers any of them. By this stage, he's very deaf. His eyesight is poor. He can't really read letters. Sometimes the letters are read out to him. Bill has no interest in acknowledging them. But word gets out, and he becomes almost a bit of a carnival attraction. As you say, our old friend Stuart Rintoul was wandering through there in 1987 doing a piece on the mental health system in Victoria. He said, who's that guy over there? And Don Sanatapathy, who was the superintendent at the time, explained Bill's provenance, and Stuart went, that's crazy.
That's a yarn.
That's a yarn.
Yeah.
That's a yarn.
That's the base journalist instinct. Yeah.
The base journalist instinct. And David Johns, who an old colleague of ours, he took a fantastic photograph. That's the one on the cover of the book.
Brilliant photo. Yeah.
Isn't it a brilliant photo? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that runs.
While it's being a well-dressed man too, I love that.
Being a well-dressed man,
the tailor and all those sorts of things.
By this stage, mental patients long-term mental patients in Victoria have become entitled to the pension. So Bill is receiving a pension, of which he has nothing to spend it on. So one of the things that he's allowed to do is he's allowed to go clothes shopping. Not that he leaves.
He's a tailor. Yeah.
And the menswear shop is still there, Pete. I wandered around the main street of Ararat, and there was Foster's. And I knew from the medical records that this was where he used to buy his clothes. So I wandered into it, and it turns out that the son now owns the shop. And he said, oh, yeah, Dad remembers doing that. So I rang Ian Foster, who talked about going to take Bill's measurements in Arradale and fitting him up for his sports jackets and his slacks and his ties and his shirts. He was actually, by the end, quite a dapper man. He looked like a man, a well-dressed man from the 1920s, because clearly fashion had not moved a very great deal. So, but the really great part of this story, and this was a real Hail Mary, I never thought I'd find this, was Don Sonatopathy, who I traced to his home in Caroline Springs, said, he was interviewed on TV. I went, you're kidding. And Don said, oh, yeah. And he was actually quite talkative for Bill. And I said, oh, my God, I've got to find this. So with the help of our good friend Daniel Bredig, I knew that it had been done by the Willacy program. I knew the rough date. And the videotapes of the Willacy program from 1987 are still in the Nine archives. And I was able to find this interview. And it is amazing. Absolutely amazing. So I'm completely obsessed with this guy, Bill Wallace, but I've never heard him. And I've never seen him animate. I've seen pictures, but I've never seen him animate. Yeah, anyway, there he is on TV. And I found the journalist who did it, Deb Byrne, through LinkedIn. Yep. I found her on LinkedIn. and I interviewed her about doing the story. And it is a great story of going up to Ararat on this journey. She was the newbie in the office. It was a real long ball. Maybe it's going to be a yarn, maybe it's not. But she interviews him, and it's absolutely fascinating.
They squeezed into his bedroom, didn't they?
His tiny little bedroom. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it would have been a very tight shot. Yeah.
And he's curious. He's curious about the camera. He's curious about a woman. Because, of course, he's been in segregated wards for most of his life. I just sort of imagine the confrontation between Deborah, who apparently had borrowed the jacket of the housemate that she was living with. So she's got the padded jacket, the puffy hair. Oh. It's a great 80s moment. It's 80s meets the 20s. And it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. Anyway, he's only got at this stage about 18 months to live, and he does die in 1989. And it's a story that you almost just cannot conceive of. In some ways, it's a triumph that he lived for so long, but in others, it's just this incredible tragedy that this man's life was so wasted, was so lost, was that he was abandoned by the society that purported to care about him.
It's funny, as I read it, I kept thinking, there's a book I've read by Sebastian Barry. Yes. I kept thinking of as I was reading your book.
Indeed.
The fictional, The Secret Scripture. Roseanne McNulty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was Pat McGorry who told me about that book, because I had a chat to him about it. And he said, there's this Sebastian Barry novel. I said, right, I've got to read it. And I did.
Oh, yeah. It's a very good book, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's about the mutual dependence of the patient and their scrutineers. The relationship between the woman who's been locked up and the doctor who forms this strange rapport with her. Yeah, the system and its dependence.
There's another mutual dependence that we might just touch on before we go, and that's between the town and the institution.
And in fact, in the 1980s, as the mental health system the carceral mental health system is beginning to break down, people in Ararat become very anxious, because the mental hospital has been this very indulgent employer for decades. Generations of residents of Ararat have worked there, have benefited from its benevolence, because it was actually, there was, if you worked there, it was pretty easy to, it had huge vegetable gardens. It got lots of produce. Lots of it kind of fell off the back of trucks in those days. You got people worked for decades in the hospital. And at the idea that it might close, people became very, very anxious. And they were, in fact, they were the promoters of the Bill Wallace story. They were the people who celebrated the fact that this guy had been so well looked after for so long.
Would you have liked to have interviewed him yourself, or is it better sort of beating around in the bushes?
Would I have liked to interview him myself? Absolutely, of course. You'd want to have a go I'm not sure how much I would have been able to get from him, but it does kind of fascinate me that when he is interviewed by Deb Byrne in the late 80s, he remembers things. He remembers where he was from. You know, he says things that are that are out there, but there is something to tap. There is a memory, even though no one had asked him questions.
There was no real dementia,
so
was there?
It would have been a great challenge, wouldn't it? He would have made a great. There was no real dementing. No, he knows exactly who he is until very, very late stages. He knows exactly where he is. He's come to accept it. He's reconciled himself to his incarceration. And he can't imagine a life outside it. Except occasionally he gets a flash that he might like to live somewhere else. And he has this delusion that he owns Canada. So he thinks he might quite like to go there. I think, but it never comes to anything because he's become completely dependent on the system. Okay. In fact, at one stage,
is it delusional to think you own Canada? Do we have to worry about the president of the state? Go on.
Oh, very good, Pete. Very good. Very good. Anyway, we've probably whittled on for long enough about this story. It was really interesting. I'm really glad to have done it, even though my daughter lost interest in it, because it was a great research challenge, and it is representative of a lost world. You know, we've forgotten that this is the way that we used to treat people. And that these things were not, like I said, there's an inevitability about this story. This is not an outrage. This is the only way that the system could cope with someone like Bill Wallace.
And it wasn't contained to sort of the mentally ill or the criminally insane either, was it? I mean, where you had, in Melbourne, you had Kew cottages where children were incarcerated or locked up at a very early age. I know in Bendigo we grew up with the orphanage on the hill, which must have been a little bit like Arrowdale, you know, and the community had a relationship to that. But after a while, it became a place where there were these very old, damaged women working in a laundry. And what do we do with them? I remember my mother was part of sort of introducing them back into society. They moved into houses around our area, and they'd never been outside since they'd been dropped off at the orphanage as children.
Once a system is set up, it will sort of crank and creak on indefinitely until someone makes a very deliberate effort to stop it. And, you know, in some ways, Bill is a victim not only of our hang-ups about the mentally ill, but it's also the inevitability of bureaucracy. That if you set a system up, it will just continue to work.
Yeah.
And, you know, when I started going through
these... It worked better in those days, I reckon, Gideon, than it does now.
Maybe. Because I do conjecture at the end of the...
but the bureaucracy did.
I do. But I say at the end of the book, you know, what would happen to a Bill Wallace now? He certainly wouldn't live to nearly 108. The system wouldn't have looked after him as with the same weird tenderness that the system back then did. He'd be treated pharmacologically. His symptoms would be tamped down but probably not treated in an underlying sense. He would wander among us, and you know, these days we know that this is the way that the neglected subsist in modern society, often in plain sight, and we choose to turn away, of course.
Well, who is Wallace? The Enigma of the World's Oldest Prisoner by Gideon Haigh. Great book. You can order your copy at Cricket et al., the Substack website, and Gideon will package it up for you on his kitchen table and take it to the Carlton post office and send it to your house. No, do you charge a mail order fee? A postage fee?
Not really. No,
you should. The price of mailing things is ridiculous now. Absolutely ridiculous.
It's got quite expensive. But
I can't buy records from the United States anymore. It costs too much money.
It's funny, actually. I quite like doing it, though. I like the one-to-one relationship that you have with the readers. That you have to do each one individually. I'm often selling these books to people who bought books previously. So, and you always get feedback, and often, of course, they're part of the Cricket et al. Community, from whom it's always good to hear.
Well, get in early because it is a limited edition. You don't have a warehouse full of them, do you?
I've got a kitchen cupboard full of them. Got to put them out of sight.
Well, we don't want you having to move them to your next premises, so let's get them sold.
We don't. That would be great.
Thanks, Gideon. That was great. Love chatting about that. The Cricket et al. Book Club, first edition.
Yeah. That's all we've got time for on Cricket et al. Back to normal next week. We'll be talking more cricket on Monday. But in the meantime, it's goodbye from me.
And it's good night from him.